So I got some woodworking myths I want to go over. My Why Your Project Sucked video was really well received, and I'm working on a part 2 for that, but I had some things that didn't really fit into that, so we're gonna call them myths. First one's fun. Here's some offcuts from an 8/4 maple desk I recently made. These are from the ends, which tend to not be my best glue joints, but the myth is wood glue is not strong enough on its own, or isn't very strong, or you've got to clamp the crap out of your stuff or use a ton of glue. I do not use an excessive amount of glue, and I do not over squeeze down on my clamps at all. So here's a test. We're gonna try to break these apart. If they split on the glue line, then the glue failed. If it breaks somewhere else and we don't see the glue line, then the wood failed before they glue. And that's really the test. If your glue bond is stronger than the wood, your glue is no longer the weakest part. So you're actually then limited by the strength of the wood, not your glue bond. Pretty much every time I do this test to test my panels, that's what happens, is that the wood splits, not the glue. Ball peen hammer, 8/4 maple offcut. And I went right for the glue joint. This one looks like it was about half and half. We actually did split on the glue joint some, but otherwise the wood broke, and down here there was no glue. So that's kind of a limiting factor. If there's no glue, it's not a glue joint. Actually, let's widen this out a little bit. And instead of hitting right on the glue joint, because we're definitely trying to make it fell there, you know, more likely force might be distributed. So this time let's go right in the middle. Obviously that wood was a little cracked. Let's try over here. Okay, this one was not a good glue joint, and you can actually tell what's interesting here. This wasn't milled well because you can tell the glue is actually just dry here, so it wasn't really even in contact. So this is one of those places I didn't have the clamp because I knew it had a bunch on the ends, so I kind of put the clamps in the middle. This one right here kind of split on the glue joint, but actually what failed first was the wood, and then it ran to the glue joint. And even this, mostly, like here's a little bit of the glue. On this bit, it actually ran past the glue joint and broke the other piece of wood instead of the glue joint. And here we've got a full section that hadn't already broke some. I have 1, 2, 3 glue joints. Let's go. Actually, we keep going middle. Let's go end. Yeah, there's another one. Not even close to the glue joint. That was over here and here. Of course, I think that's where I hit. Over here. And also, smack in the middle. So here is our setup. Yeah, I hit right there, so it actually broke right where it impacted. Big surprise. But then the other failure point was actually right in the middle of a piece of wood. So if you're ever thinking, man, do I need to put something in this? Well, it's just glue. If you milled properly and you have adequate glue and reasonable clamping strength to get that wood touching so you're smushing the glue through, it's stronger than the wood in most cases. So yeah, wood glue is enough. So there we go. I need to work out a little bit more because my heart's beating a little bit after even just smashing those, but it's probably because I kept talking. So yeah, some of them we did have some breakage on the glue joint, but all the ones that did have breakage on the glue joint, we were also breaking wood. So it's kind of 50-50. And again, those are offcuts, which aren't really the main meat and tend to be wood that's And then that last one where I still had the full length segment was very telling in that the 2 breakage points were right at the point of impact, which kind of makes sense. And then on the other end where it broke was in the middle of a board. Even though there were like 3 glue joints it could have picked, that was the path of, or the weakest link that broke. Don't sweat if you don't have a domino machine or a doweling jig or biscuit joiner. If you just properly mill your wood, get enough glue in there, which isn't a ton. Too much glue can actually be bad because most wood glue, PVA glue, is not a gap filler. So if you have gaps in there, it doesn't span. And where you notice I did have splits on the glue, that was normally where on the end it wasn't milled super great, because that's why I was getting the snipe. And so the wood, you know, had a little gap, and that PVA was trying to fill the gap. PVA is not a gap filler, so that was a weak point because it didn't actually pull the wood together. But yeah, you'll be fine. And the trick with, well, what is a good glue joint? Don't slather it, make sure it's coated, light clamping pressure. And the biggest thing is if you're trying to overcome bad milling with clamp pressure, that's a bad glue joint, because if you have a gap and you can clamp that out, but you really got to crank down on those things, you've probably potato chipped your panel. But beyond that, that's a whole lot of pressure that now that glue has to resist, because just because you clamped it doesn't mean that that wood all of a sudden went, I give up. Guess what? As soon as you take that clamping pressure off, that wood is going to put that glue in tension because it's trying to pull itself apart, and glue doesn't really like to be in tension. That's not its strongest point. So yeah, if you're trying to overcome bad milling with clamps, then you're probably gonna have a lot of splitting on glue joints, because it's not a good glue joint. So I guess that would be the thing, is if you wanna do bad glue joints, you absolutely need to put some reinforcement in there. But if you're taking the time and doing good glue joints, you don't need any reinforcement. Which feeds into the second point. Obviously, if you've been around, you see I use Dominoes and Dowels, and never really use biscuits. Tried to once, story on that. It was like, well, why do those things even exist then if I don't need them for strength? The nice thing about the Domino is it's a floating mortise and tenon. What we just tested was a long grain glue up. Yes, that's correct. As you would see in a panel, like a tabletop desktop, which this is, right? All this grain's running. So yeah, in this case, we have a lot of, it's kind of the ideal glue up. But let's say I had a member coming in across, punching into this with end grain. End grain does not glue very well, and this would be a very different kind of joint. We have a butt joint going on. So what? My battery's out. I just put new batteries. So where you're creating a joint, which is basically we're gonna have some type of 90-degree or other, but you know, not a panel, then you do need reinforcement for strength, especially if you have different grain orientations coming together. But on a panel, why you might see Dominoes, biscuits, Dowels, etc., is not for reinforcement and strength, but for alignment. And that is making sure that when the pieces come together, you know, if I've got two boards here, the tops are all smooth and so are the bottoms, or definitely at least the tops, and not, you know, offset. And if your boards aren't perfectly flat, you might have a little bow action going on. So maybe they're smooth here and they're not smooth here, and they're smooth here and not smooth there. Those Dominoes, biscuits, Dowels can help bring all that, you know, because you do have a little play in wood, you know, add the strength to force the wood to be where it needs to be, but then you have that mechanical strength, not chemical strength, i.e. a piece of wood in there holding it in place, not just the structure of the glue trying to bond things, hold them in place. So if you're trying to, you know, make up for some defects or just make sure things are flush, that's where Dominoes, biscuits, Dowels come into play for alignment. Again, not necessarily needed for just panel strength. Hope that makes sense. Here's another good one that comes up in my videos whenever I talk about panels. And that's alternating growth rings. You know, a tree is a circle, but we take rectangles out of it. So almost always, unless you have quarter sawn board, basically on that cross-section end view, you're gonna have arches. Here's a great example you can see easy. These are rift sawn, but basically you can see all the growth rings. But imagine if this was a smaller board, there's kind of an arch action going on in these boards. You need to come down here so you can see it. Or on this, you know, maple section I broke on the end, you can see, I marked that this one we have the cup going this way, then it's opposite. This one's the same as the one beside it, and then the one on the end is opposite. So this is sort of alternated, but not really. Now, when people normally talk about alternating growth rings, what they mean is when you glue up your panel, you want one arch going down, the next arch going up, then down, then up, then down. So up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, just alternating. I don't pay any attention to that, and I just glue them up. Whatever side I think or face looks the best is going to be the show side, and then I just glue them up. The end. And it ties into another point I'm going to put here, which is understanding wood movement. Wood, when it moves, there's really three kind of movements that happen. One is when it dries, because as it's losing moisture, the fibers are literally changing shape. They're dehydrating, getting smaller, and so everything moves. As it does that, it creates this equilibrium of force, because not every tree is perfectly straight grained all the way up with even growth rings, right? Trees are under pressure, and so often that pith, the heart, isn't perfectly centered. One side will be a little smaller, one will be a little bigger, because as it was resisting gravity or the wind or as a branch, or it twisted. Because of that, there is compression and tension in that wood. Then we take a plank out and we let that plank dry. As that plank dries and moisture is drawn out, and it comes to a new happy place. But once we run it through milling machines and we remove some of those fibers, unevenly, because again, it's not perfectly flat and smooth. We're taking away some fibers that were adding tension or some fibers that were contributing compression, and they're gone. Well, all those other fibers now are going to behave differently because those forces that were acting on them were removed. So it's going to move. And then we have seasonal movement, which is as the moisture content of the wood moves throughout the seasons, which is pretty minimal unless you have drastic changes. But if your furniture is in a climate controlled environment, you're looking at 4 to 5% wood moisture change throughout the year, which is not significant, but can be. Anyway, the idea with the alternating growth rings is that wood cups, it likes to cup. So you alternate growth rings because one of the reasons you have panels turn into like bowls or big potato chips is, well, all the growth rings were the same way. And so when they all cupped the same direction. Instead of saying flat, it went like this. But if you alternate them, and this is why I don't like this idea, your panel stays flatter because instead of turning into one chip, it turns into a ripple. I don't want a chip or a ripple. Wood can't fully rehydrate. Once it dries, it can absorb a little bit more. But what that really does is changes the growth, and it's always gonna cycle. So if you have something that's flat that then goes not flat, that's because it wasn't dried properly, or it wasn't dry when you started, or you didn't mill it properly, because it should not move that much seasonally. So now, if you are working with dry wood and you mill it properly, which is more than one milling, so you make sure that after it mills, it has a day or two to rest and it didn't move, and if it moved, you mill it flat again until it stays flat, then it doesn't matter what orientation you put your rings in. Basically, if your flat panel is turning into a potato chip or a ripple, it's not the fault of the wood and the environment. It's your fault for working with wood that's not dry enough or milling it wrong. And that's why I don't care about alternating growth rings or what orientation they go into. And with the way our buildings are conditioned now, there's no reason it shouldn't if your wood is dry and you milled it properly, which is probably more than one session if it needs it. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about this. So, setting change. We're here by my really dusty dust collector because obviously I need to seal up some ports or something. Another myth is that hobbyists don't need to worry about dust collection because you're not doing it a ton. It's professionals that need to worry about it. Well, this seems to be an understood fact. I haven't done the science, but I keep looking it up, and it seems like it's been actually researched. So this is a true statement. Man, nothing like invalidates a true statement like doing air quotes on it. In a few hours of woodworking, a hobbyist or garage woodworker inhales more carcinogenic dust particles, the really small ones, than a professional or someone working in a professional shop will in months. And the reason is when you're in a big shop where you have a bunch of employees working, OSHA's involved, and so there's standards, and they have dust collectors that like dump into tractor trailers, 3-phase, 20 plus horsepower machines, pulling mass amounts of air, evacuating all those fine particles from all the machines in the shop. So that shop air is actually very clean. But in a hobbyist environment, you normally have very budget-friendly, price-sensitive tools that are not designed with dust collection in mind, or underpowered dust collectors and piping that isn't really evacuating very well. So you're putting far more dust in the air with that equipment than is happening in an industrial environment where they're running far more saws that are larger, cutting more stuff and more per hour, and probably not wearing a mask. And the reason that's important is because really fine wood dust is extremely hazardous. And the other thing that goes into that is if you are running a dust collector, you're probably running one of those dust collectors that have the 5-micron bags on it that don't, or 5 or 10 micron bags like you can pick up at most of the box stores. So the filter is just a bag that sits at about face height. The thing is, what you're doing is, if you are capturing those small particles, and really the most dangerous particles are the ones between 0.3 micron and 3 microns. Those are the ones that really do damage to your lungs, that all your nose hairs and all the things your body does to filter air to protect your lungs can't catch and misses. So what you're doing is you're sucking some of them at the tool, pulling them into a motor, and then injecting them through a filter that isn't rated to stop it at face height while you're not wearing a properly sealing dust mask. If anything, there's actually a line of thought that says running those kind of dust collectors is worse for your health if you're not wearing a mask than not running them at all. Because if you're not running them at all, hopefully things are just settling down or moving away. But if you're near your dust collector with the filter bag right at your face, you're just ejecting the worst of the particles right into your breathing zone. I don't know if I buy that. It's a thought. Basically, if you are gonna have a dust collection system, make sure you're using a pleated filter. Those are the only ones rated typically to get down to the 0.1 micron range that actually is stripping the stuff out of the air you need. If you can get a dust cleaner, you can make them. I've got a video on how to make air cleaners that just kind of cycle the ambient air, or just get a properly fitting dust mask that really seals and wear that. And then if you are wearing a dust mask in the shop, make sure that you don't take it off as soon as you're done cutting. This is a common mistake where you're wearing your dust mask, you're making a bunch of dust, you're like, I'm done making dust, but the air is all dusty because it hasn't settled, and you take it off and then you set it down somewhere that all the dust can fill up in it. Now you're breathing nice deep breaths of all that really dusty air. So if you are wearing your dust mask, don't take it off until the air settles. And then if you're going to take it off, put it in a clean space if the air is still dusty. Like I have an office, so if I'm in here doing things where I'm making a lot of dust, that even with my stuff running, I want to be wearing a mask, or I'm going to be ejecting dust in my face. Like if I have to move my overarm dust collection, my table saw, and I wear a mask and it's dusty in here and then I got to go, I don't leave my mask in here. I put my mask in my office with my door closed, then go do whatever, come back in, and then my mask was in a clean-ish space, not just filling up with all those fine particles that I really don't want to breathe. Hope that makes sense. But yes, dust is really hazardous. And one of the reasons I'm passionate about that is like cancer, huge, bad deal. We all know what that is. But there's another risk that comes from inhaling pollutants, and that's COPD. You're probably more familiar with that with smoking. And here's the thing that scares me about COPD, which you can get from a lot of things we deal with in a wood shop, finishes and products that contain VOCs, and wood dust is a big one. And that is when you have symptoms of COPD, it's too late. You've already done irreversible damage to your lungs that will never heal. The damage that wood dust can do to your body, by the time you realize that you have symptoms like, oh, something's wrong, you've already caused something you can never heal from. That's what scares me about it, and that's why I'm kind of passionate and want to share that information with you, because it's not one of those, oh, well, I'll just do it until it seems to be a problem. So, hope that makes sense. Here's another one. And if you watched my sanding mistakes video, you've already heard this. But one of my favorite myths is that sandpaper does not get dull, it turns into finer sandpaper. Most of the sandpaper we use in woodworking, the grit, the actual cutting surface, is aluminum oxide. And there is such thing as a friable aluminum oxide. And the way it cuts is it's basically tiny rocks. So aluminum oxide is aluminum that is oxidized. So it's the hard part of aluminum. Aluminum's fairly soft metal. But then it's sorted through sieves, and based on how small it is determines on the grit. Obviously, bigger pieces are lower grit, smaller pieces are finer grit. 36 grit sandpaper has bigger, coarser chunks with bigger sharp points than, say, 400 grit sandpaper, which is really small, makes fine scratches and sharp points. Here's the thing, let me get a visual aid. No, that's concrete. Got some rocks. So let's imagine this is a big grit. This is a small grit. We've kind of got some points on here. So obviously those sharp points are what's gonna do the scratching, which isn't really scratching, it's cutting. The cutting of the wood fibers to remove material and make dust. A friable material means that instead of just rounding off, it'll break, and this should break. And most companies don't use friable aluminum oxide, but if they do use friable aluminum oxide, then what happens is as it's used, once it has enough pressure, it shears and shows another new sharp point. You know, this was bigger, now it's smaller, but it's sharp. But here's the thing, this is, you know, glued to paper and has adhesive and everything, and pretty soon it's gonna break a couple times, and then you're just left with small pieces that don't really protrude well from the substrates and surfaces. It's worn itself out. That's friable aluminum oxide. Non-friable that most people use, and I don't know if I'm gonna really be able to show it with just this, you know, whatever rock, but it has a sharp point. But what I'm doing is rubbing that on wood. I bet that sounds really obnoxious. I'm rubbing that on, oh, it actually happened. And now, you probably can't see it, but it's all rounded. This isn't sharp anymore. I wouldn't have wanted to drag this across my face before I did that, but now it's like, whatever, it's dull. Just like if you take a kitchen knife or a chisel, you know you wouldn't want to rub it on this concrete block because you're just gonna round off and mutilate that edge. It's not sharp anymore. So when it dulls, it dulls. It doesn't become finer grit. It might be making lighter scratches, but it's probably not actually scratching the wood, it's mashing the wood because it's dull, and dull things don't cut. So saying coarse grit paper becomes fine grit sandpaper is basically saying this big piece, once it's worn out, instead of losing its sharpness, becomes a small sharp piece, because that's what fine grit sandpaper is. It's not big dull pieces, it's small sharp pieces. It's no different than saying, after I use this fat chisel full width a bunch and it's dull, it's actually not a big dull chisel, it's just a small sharp chisel. Now if I say that, you're like, you're a freaking moron. But when you say coarse sandpaper becomes fine sandpaper, that's what you're saying. Really, it's just kind of acting like finer sandpaper. That comes from the fact that, oh, it leaves smaller scratches, less scratches, and removes less material. Right, it's not losing less material because it has small sharp particles like fine sandpaper does. It's because it's dull, and dull things don't cut. That worn out 80 grit sandpaper may be leaving indentions, not scratches, because it's not cutting, the size of 220. But here's the thing, if you took that dull 80 paper off and put on 220, that fresh, clean, new 220 paper is going to cut way faster and remove far more material because it's actually sharp particles. About 20 minutes is all the life you get out of paper. So if you've been using that paper for 20 minutes, throw it away. You're just ruining your project and making everything take more time. You're not actually saving yourself any money. So yeah, throw your sandpaper away when it's done. I hope that makes sense. The last one I want to hit on, because I think this is something that might help a lot of people, is hand tools are hard to use. It's like, oh, machines are easy. It's like, actually, everything that goes into use a machine properly, like, because you've got to know how to keep it calibrated, maintain it, make sure everything's square the way it needs to be, maybe make some jigs, understand the way the blade turns and the forces that are acting. And to use machines well is a skill set. Well, so's hand tools. It's just that it's easier to find videos, and it's more of a, using a machine properly is far more of a knowledge basis and less a muscle memory skill basis. Whereas using hand tools well requires a little skill, but most of that skill really just comes from some proper knowledge. So a few basic tips to help you out. If you're using a chisel, the intuitive thing tends to you always want to use the flat whenever you're working on something. But a lot of times if you watch hand tool users, power tool users tend to use chisels upside down. Let's say I've got something here I want to remove, a power tool user is trying to get this flat and go for it. But if you have more time with hand tools, you realize actually going bevel down most times makes things easier, because now the handle's out of the way. Because now to engage the cutting surface, I'm not trying to be flat, I'm actually up here and I have far more control. I can tip down a little bit to raise my cutting surface and engage less. I can lift up a little bit and get more of my cutting surface and engage more, or try to dive. So that's a tip. And the other big tip is, what makes hand tools really hard to use, like any tool, is it being dull and not sharp enough. Sharpening is a subject all on its own. I'm going to dive into that, find some good sharpening videos. There's tons out there, you know, get some decent stones and a strop. Strop makes a big difference in fine tuning that edge, and make sure your hand tools are sharp, and you'll enjoy using them a lot more, and they'll be far easier to use as well. Now with that, also sawing, I did a video on how to saw straight. But there's really two tips that's going to help you a ton with using any kind of handsaw. One is your body is in the way. So a lot of times when you see people saw, they want to work in the center of their body, which makes sense. This is where our center of mass is and we have most focus. But for this saw to cut straight, it needs to move straight. To move straight here, I have a lot of things going on with my body mechanics, right? It's my wrist, my hand ankle. My wrist is having to rotate. My elbow's like doing this funny thing, and my shoulder can move this way. You know, my shoulder can move all kinds of ways. This is ball and socket joint, but I'm trying to move this in like 2 dimensions because it's coming over and moving forward. My elbow's doing things, my wrists are doing things. It's really hard to stay straight. What if I just get my body out of the way and move here? Now the swinging motion, right, and you being able to use my elbow as a hinge, my wrist stays pretty much straight, my elbow gets to just hinge, and my shoulder gets to just move. It's way easier to keep a saw tracking straight. My body is out of the way. Even just being here, all of a sudden my body mechanics change. So make sure your arm can swing freely. If you can swing your arm freely, your saw will stay a lot straighter. So that's sawing straight. Sawing square is also easy. What you want to do is just look in the reflection. If your saw is shiny, you'll see the reflection of the corner in the wood. And if it looks like that reflection goes straight through the saw and continues off the other side, then you're square. And just try this sometime. Get a saw, put it on a corner piece of wood, and just wiggle it around, and you'll see that reflection dance all over the place. If it's not in line, it's not square. If it's in line, it's square. Now you'll have to do some practice. I'm not saying that's gonna like suddenly make you a saw master. If you just keep them in mind, you'll see dramatically improved results. Draw a few straight lines and just do some practices, and within a few cuts, you'll be surprised how much better you're doing. So yeah, make sure your tools are sharp, not dull, which applies to your handsaw too. If your handsaw's dull, it's gonna be really, really hard. Keep your body out of the way, use the reflection to make sure you're square. Anyway, that's all I've got for this video. If you're the kind of person that likes to like and comment and share my videos, super, super, super thank you. That actually goes a long way and helps a lot. I really appreciate it. If you don't, that's cool too. I'm just happy you decided to join me for this journey, and hope you learned something, were inspired, or at least entertained. And until next time, make time to make something. Hope that makes sense. Did it make sense to you?
I think so.
Right?
I think it was kind of long.
Yeah, it was, but